Right. Right. Hello, data-taters. J. Oliver Glasgow here saying your child may be taken at any moment. Want to save them? Then stay tuned and make sure to hit subscribe and that bell thing for reminder, like, follow, and share, and welcome to another explosive episode of Private Eye, the show that explores all things privacy. But this evening, maybe not so many jokes. We'll get back to that next week. And by the way, this episode is not suitable for younger viewers. Around the globe tonight, while you're watching this show, children are being abducted, taken, depersoned, a technique where their abductors destroy all forms of identity, communications, and mementos in front of them to humiliate them, to break them. Then trafficked and sold into slavery, 85% of the time it's sex slavery, and then horribly brutalized, some say 20 to 30 times a day, every day. Tonight, we're going to tell you how to do something about it. We'll be joined by some amazing experts from Scotiabank. Executive Vice President Stuart Davis will talk to us about Project Shadow. And from Destiny Rescue, a heroic organization, Director of Strategic Partnerships Corey Nichols will tell us about courageous raids happening around the world to save children. You will not want to miss this. And we'll share with you groundbreaking technology, but we'll need your help. If what you are about to see truly shocks you, shakes you to the core, be prepared with a pencil and paper, or, as my child likes to remind me, your cell phone has a camera on it. Just take a picture of the screen. The solutions really start with you. Yes, you. Making some phone calls and sending some emails. We'll show you the how after we show you the why. In researching tonight's show, we did a ton of internet searches. What I personally encountered first while looking for companies to talk to, and I use the term companies on purpose, was a charity with a homepage of some really scary stats and a button to donate money. Their second page told me about how they helped by donating to other charities. And the third was a bunch of photos from their biannual black tie galas. When I clicked on Contact Us, it was an email address, or worse, a web form, and the phone numbers were for another organization altogether. That could help you if you were actually in a trafficking crisis. In other words, they set up a charity to fundraise, give some of the funds to other charities, I'm sure that helps, throw parties, and give you a phone number to someone else. This happened again and again and again. There are scores of charities, companies set up to scare you, take your donations, invite you to a formal dinner, and provide a link to the national hotline. Meanwhile, human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. $99 billion of that is from sexual exploitation. Globally, human trafficking has surpassed the illegal sale of arms and is expected to eclipse the sale of illicit drugs in the next year or so. It will be the largest organized crime industry in human history. We will be a planet of child abusers. There are 40 million victims of human trafficking globally out there right now, wishing that they were home and safe. 25% of them are children. 1.2 million children are trafficked. That's a clinical word, a sterile word for being ripped away from your family and raped repeatedly for likely the rest of your life. I want you to think about that. Every time you hear the word trafficked tonight, 1.2 million children are trafficked every year. One child every 26 seconds. And a child is sold every 30 seconds. Do the math. Some don't make it. 161,000 per year don't make it to be sold. You know, if every 30 seconds a child contracted COVID, the media would be in a total meltdown. But if every 30 seconds a child is just, abducted and sold into sex slavery, the media doesn't give a fuck. In fact, you may actually care more that I just said the word f than you do about the 1.2 million children being abducted this year. The average age? 12 to 14 years old. Children are trafficked for sex 4 times more than adults. And once enslaved, a typical child is sold for sex. Some estimate an average of 20 to 30 times per day. And let's use another clinical word, brutalized. Let's be conservative and say it's only 10. That's 1,157 criminal paid sexual acts on children every second. Brutalized. I want to help all of us understand these really big numbers better. So I asked our producers to put some up on the screen. There you go. See, right now, they're all zeros. If it only took joining the privacy co-op, making a few phone calls, sending a couple of emails to keep them at 0, would you do it? You know, regardless of your answer tonight, right now in this second, this is their reality. We're going to let those numbers click up through the show so that we can all stay mindful of what's at stake. As you do, I want you to contemplate a quote from Joseph Stalin. Losing one is a tragedy. Losing a million, it's just a statistic. Ask yourself this question as you watch these numbers. Are you more like Stalin or more like the person you hope you are? If your answer is the latter, every single one of those numbers is a child that needs your help tonight. May none of us sleep well until they do. We'll be back.
A call to 1-800-THE-LOST can play a crucial role in locating a missing child. That's the hotline for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's staffed 24 hours a day, year-round, and can take calls in more than 190 languages. In addition to taking reports on children, it provides safety resources and reunification assistance for families of missing children who have been safely found. The call center provides invaluable services to families and law enforcement, from the opening of a case to its close.
Right. You know, to help us understand this issue a little bit better tonight, we've got one of the world's leading experts from Scotiabank, Executive Vice President Stuart Davis. Stuart, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
It's great to have you here. Hey, listen, Stuart, before we get too serious in the numbers here, you know, every single week our viewers like to get to know our guests a little bit better. And one of the techniques that I use is by asking some questions from the French philosopher Bernard Pivot, who he had 10 questions that he would always ask every guest. Now, we're a nonprofit, so we can't afford all 10, so I'm only going to ask you 4.5. That's about all we can afford, and then we run out of money on that one. So first question, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Really? That's pretty cool. What is your favorite number?
7.
You know, for a banker, that's a great question because I wanted to know what you thought. And by the way, I think you're the
How about
second
billions?
7 that we've had. What's that?
How about billions?
Billions. There you go. 7 billions.
Yeah.
I'll take it. What profession other than yours would you most like to attempt?
Bodybuilding.
Bodybuilding. I think you could do it.
Yeah.
I think you'd
Lots of discipline. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. What is your favorite flavor?
Vanilla.
Vanilla. It's the world's most leading. That's the leading one, right? That's the best one.
That's it.
All right. Here's your half question. Here's your half question. Don't let it throw you. Who would you like to? And that's where we run out of money. So who would you like to just fill in the blank, whatever you want to do?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. All right. The historic answer from Stuart Davis. who went to a couple of historic universities. You went to Georgia Tech and University of Georgia.
Indeed.
I guess you're conflicted during football season. I don't know. Yeah, I went to Samford University in Alabama, and go Bulldogs. And I didn't know how many Samford fans there were until I moved to Georgia and heard everybody yelling "Go Bulldogs" all the time, and I was very excited. I felt like I was home. Your resume reads like the Sherlock Holmes of super sleuths: Capital One, Western Union, USAA, BMO, and now Scotiabank. It's one of the largest, top 50. I think you guys are ranked 40 right now, something like that. Executive Vice President, Global Head for Financial Crimes and Risk Management. So you've got all of the numbers for everybody. And what I want to ask you about is specifically to the topic tonight, child sex trafficking.
Mhm.
You guys have done some remarkable work on money laundering and fraud, money fraud specific to human trafficking. But and I want to maybe dive into that deeper, but I'm really interested in this Project Shadow that I'm hearing about coming out of your organization out of Canada. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. About a year ago, or a little bit over a year ago now, we got together with the Canadian Center for Child Protection, as well as with our regulatory authority that we report to routinely, and we said, what public-private partnership can we form to address this problem of online child sexual exploitation? We formed Project Shadow, and we brought together banks, we brought together industry participants, law enforcement, the RCMP, as you're commonly aware of, and said, you know, what can we do here? And the model that banks follow is that once we have guidelines, we generally start reporting certain types of transactions. In fact, we're legally obligated to report certain types of transactions. And by working with our peers and these industry participants, we formed an operational alert. And we said, these are the indicators of online child sexual exploitation. The distributors, the purchasers, the creators of content, as well as the even potentially identifying victims. And these red flags, we've published them, we've distributed them to the banks and other reporting entities. Not just banks in Canada, right? We're talking about cryptocurrency firms, we're talking about money service and payment service companies. All now have an obligation and both voluntary, but also, you know, an opportunity to report these types of transactions.
Wow. So you guys are watching the numbers. You, of course, have to watch the numbers for fraud and different things. And you're picking up on these indicators, and you're working now with public-private connections to make all of this happen. Is this just Scotiabank that's doing this, or is it broader?
So all of these public-private partnerships have any bank that wants to volunteer or any industry, financial industry participant that wants to volunteer and contribute can join. But there's typically one bank that leads the way or sponsors the project. There was a previous project that I was also involved in 5 or 6 years ago called Project Protect, which is focused on the broader theme of anti-human trafficking. In fact, this very week, I've been attending a conference with the UN and the OSCE, which stands for the Organization for Security and I think something in the Europe area. But anyway, it's, you know, this group is really, they're really focused on, you know, this notion of human trafficking and how can we disrupt it, not just in the sexual slavery, but also in the labor trafficking, as you mentioned earlier.
So when you're talking about sharing information, and particularly like not just bank to bank, but now to law enforcement, as banks have a duty to report some of this stuff to law enforcement and to the government officials. I have a quick question for you on around 9/11. I think we were all surprised to find out that many of the law enforcement agencies weren't really able to share information back and forth. And here you are talking about information being shared back and forth. Now, I know, you know, the Patriot Act and some things around the world in other countries have made it easier for that to happen. But do you guys have the same latitude that they have for fighting, say, terrorism?
Well, that's a great question. So in Canada, we can't share any personal information. We're not sharing names other than what is publicly available in newspaper articles or the media. But in the U.S., there's certain provisions where you can actually share information between banks. So the U.S. has a much more flexible system to be able to really address this type of criminal activity. But in Canada, we share typologies. You know, what are the indicators of risk in this particular space? And through those typologies, and they include things like looking for late night online transactions with high risk jurisdictions. So purchases from the Philippines or the Thailand coming out of Canada, perhaps even on Friday evenings or late into the night, it's a very big indicator of risk for this type of crime. During a non-COVID situation, travel is an indication of risk as well.
I want to follow up on COVID here in a second, but just kind of circling back to that same question. So law enforcement agencies, we want them to be able to fight child sex trafficking. Or do you feel that they have that same latitude to fight it as, say, terrorism? They certainly have that for terrorism.
You know, realistically, I mean, this is terrorism of a child, and there is not the same latitude. In fact, the provisions and laws in many countries need to be changed and adapted to really protect the most innocent of society, our children. And that's one of the other things that we're actively engaged in, is how can we influence policy through these meetings like the UN to change global policy, as well as not only the way regulators think about this, but also how do governments think about this. Does law enforcement even have the ability to prosecute these crimes? And there's a number of countries where there's no criminal offense for this. This is a crime, right? But there's countries where this is not treated as a crime, so you really can't prosecute the offenders and the abductors.
You know, it almost feels reprehensible that you would not be able to, if your one law enforcement agency can't share data with the other law enforcement agency around this topic, when, to me, I can't think of a more defining example of terrorism than terrorizing a child every day for the rest of their lives. This sounds like a homework assignment for our viewers to reach out to their legislature and say, what's the deal? You know, why doesn't this same latitude for terrorism apply to fighting child sex trafficking? I can't comprehend it. What's the magnitude of this problem for our viewing audience?
Well, it's huge, as your numbers are actually showing right now. But just taking Canada alone last year, and we're talking more specifically around online child sexual exploitation, last year alone, well, really 2019, let me shift back a year. It's the latest year we have the stats available for. There were over 65,000 cases reported to the RCMP and the government around this type of crime. And then an additional 35,000 cases came up from the US into Canada. So that's 100,000 cases of this crime specifically in Canada last year. A recent report by the UK has shown that these types of crimes have almost more than doubled during the COVID situation. And the COVID has really exacerbated this issue. People are at home, people don't have income, and we're talking globally, right? This content is not just produced in Canada or in the US, it's produced all over the world. In fact, it's produced a lot more, but it's more than doubled in my estimation during this period of COVID. And it's become, as you said, almost the #1 organized criminal enterprise in the world.
You know, I wonder if governments were cognizant of that when they were shutting everything down. You know, this is certainly a lesson learned, and there were a lot of them during the age of COVID, certainly. But when governments force us to stay in our homes, there's a lot of, I guess, unintended consequences. And what we're hearing from you tonight is that the numbers have almost doubled. You know, you do a lot of work in this area from your bank, but you're also really dialed into global policy and what's going on in that front. Is there some news on that front of what's happening right now?
Well, there's a number of NGOs, which is basically the same as charities, undertaking this very topic. And tech firms, other types of organizations are coming together to say, how can we stop this? How can we make a difference? How can we change the legislation? And you have to look at it end to end. It's not just what we as banks see. We see a very small piece of this, right? It's the whole end-to-end process, the ability to prosecute, the ability to identify and arrest, the ability to rescue the victims. And another area we're involved in is providing support for victims, especially those that are more germane to the general human trafficking category once they come out of that. And so end to end, you have to look at the whole system, and it doesn't work if just one part's strong and the other part's weak. We're trying to make all components of this work well.
We are going to be speaking in the second half of the show to Corey Nichols of Destiny Rescue, and I think he's going to be talking about that other bookend on the other side of this thing, which is rescuing and then taking care of the victims afterwards, and it must be absolutely horrific work. So let me ask you this question. Is this matter, do you think that this is more of, and you mentioned it earlier, I think, do you feel that this is more of a human rights issue, or is this a criminal issue, or is it both?
It's really both, but I think the first opportunity that government should look at is addressing it from a human rights concern. If you really put human rights front and center, and we're talking about rights a lot these days, privacy rights, but racial rights as well as human rights in this spectrum. If you put the focus on that, I think it gets a lot of attention. But it's also a criminal matter, right? And deserves to have strong laws to prosecute it. I don't know why we can't use some aspect of the laws that give us the ability to share information for things like terrorism, to also share information where there's terrorism or violation of human rights. This is an important change. I think that a lot of the regulators are starting to see, specifically in the area that I work in the banking sector and the regulation and our obligations to report. But this is also incumbent on the media, the social media companies and the others that are dealing with the content and the images. In fact, this past weekend, there was a major telecom in France that finally decided to take down over 2 million images that were potentially tied into child sexual exploitation, as well as 35,000 videos. I don't know why it would take so long for an organization that sees that to do something that's right.
Wow. You're touching on a really interesting subject here, bringing this back to human rights. At the Privacy Co-op, of course, we're very interested in information rights. We're all over that. But what I'm hearing you say is that, and what I'm hearing through the whole conversation is that prosecution is a big component of this. In some countries, this isn't against the law. And how interesting it would be that we might be able to prosecute on something else like information rights, like using a person's likeness in these videos that they take and sell. This could be an angle where lawyers could tie into some of these bad guys. It would be a little bit like taking down Al Capone for his tax evasion. It's a different hook into this, and it's exciting to me. I hope everybody's watching. This is something they should be talking to their lawmakers about. Let me ask you, kind of in closing here, what can our viewers do to perhaps help out? Is there some things that they can do with Project Shadow or what have you?
Well, that's a great question. And it really depends on what angle you can come at this from personally. First and foremost, tons of charities out there involved in this space, but you got to be careful and really focus on those, like you said, that are legitimate and doing something. So it's just not throwing money at the problem. I really would say it's more about doing something small and getting personally involved. If you can just do one thing, it can really help. I know in this sector that I'm working in, there's some nonprofit organizations now that are looking for volunteers to help scrape the dark web. I talked a little bit about images that were on the open web, but over 50% of the content, we believe, that's on the dark web is tied into pedophilia or violent child sexual exploitation. And there's companies now working through the approval of law enforcement to put together cases around this so that these matters can be swiftly and quickly dealt with.
Thank you for appearing with us tonight, Stuart Davis. We really appreciate it, and God bless your efforts.
Thank you, Jay, for having me.
We'll be right back. 1.2 million children will be sold into sexual slavery this year. 2,314 children are sexually molested per second for pay as products. Are you happy with a world where that is allowed to happen? Well, if you're yelling at your device right now, screaming no, then you're going to love this next idea. We're going to show you how you can help bring this to an end. And all it's going to cost you is a few minutes of your time. No money, just your action. Let me take just a couple of minutes to show you how consent works today, and then you'll see how we can turn it into a new lifeline for your child if they are ever abducted. Let me beam up into our demo room. Love that. And let's start with a bank and an information rights authorized agency, a nonprofit. It's okay if you've never heard of that before. Privacy Co-op is one. There are others. The bank wants to get new customers, right? So they offer the best products and services they can. A customer opens an account and then starts spending money in many different ways. Now, banks have the ability to measure these spending habits and identify fraud and other trends. In this data age, banks can accomplish quite a few things with this data, some of which are prohibited by regulations, while others are allowed, some with the customer's consent and some without. This is a big part of how financial organizations make money today, by selling data where they can. In some cases, the customer may opt out of this. They can either go directly to the bank or go through authorized agents. When requested, the authorized agent may notify the bank that their customer has changed their mind about how the bank does all of these things. Banks like to work with authorized agents because it makes it easier when there's a single license in place to manage consent from a number of their customers. This is why banks and other businesses become affiliates of authorized agencies. It helps them comply with various privacy regulations around the world. With this new relationship in place, the customer may wish to reverse their opt-out into an opt-in so that their secondary uses of data can be licensed by the bank. This could result in dividends being shared with the customer through their authorized agent. Money in their pockets, right? So this is a normal, healthy information use relationship. You could think of this as a little consent molecule in the grand scheme of things. The customer will enjoy full control of their information rights and receive dividends, while the bank may be able to find additional monetization of data with the customer's consent or create new services that will make the customer even more happy, such as customizations of regular purchases. As odd as it may sound with all the fear about data exploitation, there are many times when you actually want one business to sell your data to another. For example, let's try this. Let's say that there's a telephone company and they're also an affiliate to the authorized agency. They have customers as well. One of them is a parent, and just like the customer above, this parent uses their telco device to make all kinds of transactions. Just like the bank above, the telco has the ability to detect fraud and other abuses. Now, let's say that you're this customer, and one day you go into a bank and request a loan. You're going to fill out all kinds of information with the loan officer. One thing you'll fill in is your cell phone number, right? The bank will use that cell phone number as one of the validations they do before giving you the loan. So they call your telephone company and ask your phone number is correct. The telephone company sells them the answer, for $1. In other words, they sell your data. This is an example of when you would actually want them to sell your data. So the bank collected your consent and then paid the telco. So let's then say that with an authorized agent in place representing you to both companies, well, they agree to your terms and conditions for a change for these types of transactions, giving you more protections. It also means that they could cut you in for small dividends per each request. After all, it is your information and you own the rights to it. All right, so one such additional protection, well, authorized agents make the buyers of your information agree that they can't resell your data after they use it for their primary purpose. In other words, the bank can't buy it once from the telco and then resell it for the rest of your life. That just wouldn't be fair. So, With the authorized agent in place, and when both businesses are affiliates, you're in control of your information and you get dividends when businesses license its use. Got it. Okay. So now, how is all of this going to save your child when they're abducted by sex traffickers? Well, remember the bank can detect fraud, particularly money laundering, and more specifically, money laundering from human trafficking. In this illustration, the bank has identified a criminal hub that's sending money to another hub. Now, the laws governing banks actually encourage examining data for fraud and sharing it with law enforcement. In some countries, it's considered a duty to share. This trafficking criminal hub here, like others, uses cell phones for communications. That means they are a business customer to the telco also. This hub and spoke pattern that you see here around the first criminal hub is very easy to detect for telcos, but there are a couple of problems. First, the laws governing telcos discourage sharing data with law enforcement. It's actually considered a duty not to share the data unless there's a court order or subpoena. So the cops have to know what to ask for specifically, and they don't with just the bank data. They can't go on a fishing expedition. And second, telcos don't want you, their customer, to know that they have this much data on you. So they're afraid to even bring it up. They have apps on your phone that record all kinds of info, and they have marketing people staying up late at night just dying to figure out a way around regulations so that they can monetize all that data. So let's say that you bought your child a cell phone. That happens a lot. And a criminal working for that hub abducted your child and they're carrying their cell phone. With an authorized agent in place managing your consent, within a matter of moments, the telco could use a pattern match on all of the fraudulent businesses that the bank exposed to law enforcement and look for the hub and spoke pattern that matches. Even if the criminal smashed your child's phone and threw it away and then carried your child to another criminal working for an entirely different hub, with your consent in place, all of this data could be combined and potentially find your child, even after they'd been passed off. Let's just throw in one more complication into the story and say that this is happening in 3 different countries. Traditionally, each government would have to reach out to the other government to request data from private corporations, which is very time-consuming. Your child would be long gone before the results come back. But with this new technology using business-to-business private contracts through an authorized agent, and in some cases even government working with authorized agents as affiliates themselves, well, the data can come together in a matter of hours rather than months. Look, this is what every phone should have on it, and it's shameful that it doesn't yet. People on the inside of phone companies, good people, have been trying to get this out for over 5 years now. So why isn't this happening today? Well, remember the telcos have a couple of sticking points here. The duty to protect your data unless they have your consent, and a concern about you learning how much data they actually have on you. Because of this, and I have firsthand knowledge, executives have had this idea shut down multiple times in recent years. For the sake of argument, can we just take that last idea and put it to rest forever? Telcos have a boatload of data on you, okay? Let's just tell them to grow up and stop pretending they don't. They need to just get over it. This is about your child. We have told you through the entire show that we need your help. With a couple of phone calls and some emails, we can change things for everyone. I'm showing you the contact information for all the CEOs for the 3 major telcos in the US and the 2 major device manufacturers. Please contact them with the following 3 short messages. First, I know you have a ton of information on me, so stop worrying about me finding out. Second, I want you to work with authorized agents like the Privacy Co-op. And third, I want to be able to consent to my data being used quickly with banking information and law enforcement in emergency situations when I or my agent gives you my consent. Point them to this video. And here's my promise to you. I'll reach out to them over and over until they hear us. I just need them to hear from you also. Stop the video and do it right now. Here's their contact information one more time so that you can pause, write it down. We'll even include it in our comments below this video. Thank you. In private eye news, the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting Program, UCR, reported from their annual child trafficking cases 85% were for commercial sex acts, 15% involuntary servitude, that's a fancy word for slavery. Yep, it's still around. Perhaps we should focus on abolishing that instead of other things. In 2018, over half, 51.6% of the criminal human trafficking cases active in the U.S. were sex trafficking cases involving only children. Good grief. Multiple sources this evening are reporting that the U.S. has become importers of child sex slaves. While we have 300,000 children per year abducted out of a population of 330 million, that's consistent with Canada, that lost 35,000 to a population of 30 million, it is estimated that 22,000 children or more are trafficked into the United States each year, generally from the Philippines and Mexico. Wow. It's hard to believe. Alan and Shauna Hammond, writing at moreforkids.info, published a story called After Abduction, 0 to 24 Hours. They have some crucial advice for you if your child gets abducted. I'll put the list up so that you can freeze it and formulate your plan now while things are calm for you. It could save your child's life. As soon as you realize that your child has been abducted, contact local law enforcement. Always be prepared to supply a complete detailed description of your child, their clothes, appearance, identifying marks, etc. Tell them everything. Make sure that they enter your child's information into the National Crime Information Center, that's the NCIC, as a missing persons file. Request that they issue a BOLO alert, be on the lookout for your child. Also ask them to notify the FBI. Your home may contain information that will be invaluable to investigating officials. Limit access to your home until investigators check it out. Shut it down. You may not have considered it, but your child's bedroom, clothing, toys, computers, and any other personal items may hold clues. Make sure to get the name of the investigating officer. Doing this will provide you with a valuable line of communication for additional information as things come to you. Write a list of people, such as friends, family members, or acquaintances who may know something that can help. Also make a list of people that have conflicts with your family and people who have moved from your neighborhood or someone who may have displayed an unusual interest in your child. Get copies of recent photos of your child that clearly show their face and appearance. You'll want to provide these copies to law enforcement, media outlets, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. Also, your state will have a missing children program. These all can assist you in making flyers for mass distribution. You can contact NCMEC directly at 800-THE-LOST. Don't try to do this step on your own. Make sure to keep track of all information you receive, from law enforcement contacts to persons calling your home. A written record is vital. Get a blank notebook and just have it in a drawer somewhere. The Amber Alert system is a powerful tool. Make sure the officials take full advantage of the Amber Alert system. There is never a better time than right now to formulate a plan of action in the unlikely event that your child is abducted. The emotions you encounter may overwhelm you. Clear actions in the first moments after abduction are critical. Having a formal plan will prevent the loss of time. Our last story tonight, hey folks, remember to hit subscribe and that bell thing, like, follow, and share. That's how we pay the bills. And don't forget to watch to the end, because we have something special to help you. It's worth sticking around for, I assure you. And that wraps up Private Eye News for this week. We'll be back with our next guest from Destiny Rescue, the exciting organization that actually saves children every day. Corey Nichols will be joining us right after this.
What do you want to get?
Ice cream.
Chocolate?
Yeah.
Let's go, honey.
Together, we can find a child by signing up for free wireless Amber Alerts on your cell phone.
I know, I didn't see the twist coming either. Joining us right now from Destiny Rescue, it's Corey Nichols. Thank you for joining us tonight. Corey, appreciate having you here.
It's an honor to be with you. Thanks, Jay.
It's great to have you. If you were following along earlier, we asked our first guest 4.5 questions from Bernard Pivu's 10 questions. That leaves 4.5 for you. So the first one is the second half of the question that we ask in the first half. Most desired taking dancing lessons with?
Ooh, that's a good question. A girl that I really like.
There you go. I like the answer. It's a good one. Google or Bing?
Google.
Google. If you could change one thing about your education, what would it be?
Ooh. That's a great question. I would take communication major. I'd be a communication major.
And that would certainly help you out more what you're doing right now. I'm certain. But you're doing, by the way, you guys do an amazing job with communications. What is your favorite smell?
Cookies, chocolate chip cookies.
Oh man. Okay, now you got me hungry. And last question: when you get to heaven, who would you most like to have tea with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jesus.
Jesus is a good answer. There you go. I like it. No, that's good. That's good. Corey Nichols, Purdue University. You've been a successful designer, marketer, media director, now with Destiny Rescue. I think one of the questions I'm sure is on our viewers' mind right now is, how does this happen? How are children lured away from their parents? Is it like a big dark van comes screaming up and they get snatched, or does something else happen here?
In most cases, it's something else. It's, a lot of people think of Taken, this guy going and banging down doors and there's abductors coming and just snatching a kid. But a lot of times it starts out of vulnerability at home. In many of the countries we work in, it's poverty that's driving vulnerability. So families are desperate. They're starving. They don't know where they're going to find their next meal. And their child, who might be 12 to 15 years old, says, I want to go out and help my family. And that is where exploitation can easily happen. They're promised work in a restaurant, in a factory, or they're promised a boyfriend or boyfriend is promising them marriage. They love them, and they're easily tricked and exploited and taken advantage of in very what seems like an innocent opportunity. And that's where traffickers really come into play and exploit a child's vulnerability.
So, and we hit earlier, we touched on the fact that this is, it seems stronger. It seems to happen more where there's poverty. Also, Stuart mentioned that this happens it doubled during the day of COVID. Did you guys see that as well during the COVID stay-at-home enforcement by governments?
We absolutely did. Like, you're dealing with a segment of society that are very poor. And when they're restricted to stay at home, they don't have any safety nets and there's no margin for error. So now they can't go out and work, their food dries up, and they're starving. We literally rescued some kids. We had rescued some kids, and one girl and her family, they were on their last little bit of food. They had no food left, and they were crying out, "What are we going to do? We don't know what to do." And that's when our Destiny Rescue caseworkers came in with a month's worth of food for them. And they said, we didn't know what we were going to do. We had no options left, and we met them in that critical need. So families are not able to go work. They're mandatory shutdown work by governments, by law enforcement, and they are very much in danger of being exploited again.
So let me ask you the next question, which is, I have a child, and I would like to think that if she ever got in that situation, that she would kick and scream and bite. How do they keep them? Do they put them in cages overnight? I mean, how could they possibly keep children after they abduct them?
Well, a lot. There's somebody that said some prisons don't have walls, and so if someone has to keep a child in a cage, that's a lot of time and attention you have to be on that child. But if you can psychologically control them by saying, "I know where your family is. If you say anything, I'll harm you, or I'll harm them. I'll harm your child." Now all of a sudden, it's a higher risk stake, and they don't know if that trafficker is serious or not. So they're now being psychologically controlled, and they feel like they have to do what the trafficker is telling them to do. Otherwise, they're not going to live. Their family might not live. They might not earn income to pay for their next meal or send money home to their family. So there's a lot of pressure put on these children, and traffickers are experts at coercing, tricking, pressuring them into doing horrible things.
And for the Western viewers, it may be very hard for us to identify with, some of what you're saying, particularly if we're not living in a shame, honor-based society. What is shame/honor? What does that mean?
So, in many of the countries, specifically in Asia, they're shame, honor-based cultures. So, for example, if a child is trafficked, she's going to look for work innocently, and someone says, "You can come work in my restaurant." And when she gets there, it's not a restaurant, it's a brothel. And if she doesn't do what she's told by the customers and the brothel manager, she's beaten, she's threatened with starvation, and she feels like she has no alternative except to do what she's told to do. And then when she is sexually abused, there's now a stigma associated with her. It doesn't matter how it happened. If it gets out into the public and into the community, she could be shunned from her own family. She could be shunned from her community. She can't find work, and she can't marry. So now she's labeled kind of as like a second-class citizen. And guess who's going to take her? A brothel. A trafficker is willing. You can come work in my restaurant. You can come work for me. And so many times, like, these kids are too afraid to speak up and say something because they're ashamed. They've brought shame to their family name. One girl in particular that we rescued in one of our undisclosed countries, her house was being broken into, and she was being raped over and over by a man in the community, while her aunt, who was her guardian, was away on a business trip. And this happened over and over again. Eventually, she got pregnant on one of these visits. She started showing in the pregnancy. She tried hiding it long enough. Her older brother found out that she had been sexually abused and had a child was pregnant out of wedlock. He hired a hitman to have her murdered for $223. And Destiny Rescue found out about that, and we rescued her, and she lives in one of our safe homes. She ended up having that child. She's flourishing in life today in a much better situation, because we care about the dignity of these kids, regardless of what culture and society teach.
Our viewers are probably picturing your teams going in, guns ablazing, big badges. Could you tell us a little bit what an MOU is?
It's MOU stands for Memorandum of Understanding. And so in many of the countries we work in, we have agreements with governments to do aftercare, like our reintegration efforts. We have MOUs to do raid work in specific countries where we're working right alongside law enforcement, or to do rescue work so that they don't look at us as perpetrators, but we are a part of working alongside law enforcement to collaborate, build cases, and ultimately root out bad guys and put them behind bars.
Help all of us to understand what a raid looks like.
Yeah, so our agents will work to build a case. Many times we have informants that are in communities all over areas in which we work that are kind of like tipping off suspicious activity, so to speak. And once they come to one of our agents with information, our agents begin to build a case. And it could be going into that area, posing as a customer. It could be infiltrating a chat room online where we're a fly on the wall, or we actually pretend to be a customer, luring traffickers, building trust, ultimately to bring prosecution. And so you're building a case, and that can take anywhere from a couple days to 6 months or more to build a case. And you're needing the right amount of information to bring prosecution so that you can put bad guys behind bars, hopefully for life. And one story in particular was the Corso operation, which there was this emboldened trafficker. He was the leader of a trafficking ring. He would even take videos of himself trafficking girls, and he thought he was so bold that he would never get caught. And we many times tried to lure him into an in-person meeting where he would bring in girls for paying customers, and he evaded us multiple times. Well, one of the traffickers under him, we actually caught her in a raid, and we rescued 3 minors. One of them was a 15-year-old girl. And the trafficker said, if I'm going down, Corso's going down with me. And so she tried calling him, but again, he felt suspicious about something and kept evading her calls. But this 15-year-old girl who we had just rescued said, I can lead you to him. I know where he's at. And he was in a very dangerous area in the Philippines. And he led our agents and top law enforcement agencies. When she was in a safe place, we were able to raid that place, and we rescued 8 more minors. They were all drug addicted, and they looked malnourished and absolutely terrified. And so we liberate kids and ensure justice for them. And we put a lot of bad guys behind bars. So this year we've had over 40 successful raids this year so far, and we've had 42 arrests, and we've had over 600 individuals rescued this year. So it's pretty amazing.
And you guys are doing work on borders as well. Is that right?
That's correct. So on the Nepali-Indian border, it's an open border, meaning Nepalese individuals and Indians, they do not need documentation to cross those borders. So they can come across without a passport or without an ID. There's at least 25,000 victims that are trafficked across that border each year. And many of them are children. Nepal has 33% of their workforce works outside of the country. Traffickers know that, and they were luring children and impoverished families across that border, never to see the light of day again if they do. So Destiny Rescue, we have 14 border crossing stations. We have MOUs with the government where our agents have uniforms and badges, and they have the power to stop any vehicle, any group of people, or any individual, stop them and question them. And they have gotten very good at rooting out suspicious activity. And many times the trafficker has trained the child at what to say, saying this is my sister, or we're married, and they will call the trafficker's parents to falsify information, but they have gotten very good at rooting out that stuff. And so if anyone would resist at the border, they're immediately arrested. And
Wow.
so we have a great working relationship right there with law enforcement, and we're rescuing at least one victim a day across those borders. And there's
I hate to cut you off. We could stay here all night, but these are remarkable stories. We put up your website. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us tonight.
It's a privilege to be on your show, Jay. Thank you for shedding light on this issue. It's an honor.
Guys are a blessing. Thank you. Bye. Wow. Oh, wow. Hey, my favorite song. You know, in our Cowboy Caboose segment, that's the end. I don't think I've ever been so glad to get to the end of a show before, but you know, you and I will wrap up our time together in a few moments, but every single one of the numbers on the screen right now are just starting to live a new hell that we can never understand. Numbers just keep clocking up. 3.4 million brutalizations since we started counting. Our guests tonight are exemplary, not just in what they do, but in what they say in their privacy policies. They both scored well with handling your data, and they both state they are fighting human slavery. When you see that ribbon on a star card, that means that the company has pledged to fight human slavery and trafficking. It's actually a requirement in many privacy regulations, and yet very few companies put their position in writing. When you're making purchases, use our search engine to check the company out first and let them know that you want them to make that pledge. In fighting human trafficking, our information rights and the information rights of your child can be a valuable tool in prosecuting the bad guys. Think of it like taking down Al Capone for tax evasion. We need every tool we can use. So tonight, we're giving you the best promo code we've ever given. And we've done this on purpose because in fighting this problem, we're going to need an army. Join our nonprofit and get involved. Write your phone company, like we said earlier, and your device manufacturer so that we can activate your consent and turn all of our data into a trap for these predators. Write your legislature and demand the same information sharing latitude that law enforcement has to fight terrorism. It better be in place to fight children's sex trafficking. I can't think of a more sinister definition of terror than what those children are going through right now. Anyone telling you any different is part of the industry. Fire them. Child sex trafficking is a $150 billion industry. Together, we can shut it down. We leave you tonight with one last look at the numbers. Good night, and God bless.